Amen. When we finish this class, we're not going to have a break. We're going to go straight into the next class, if that's okay. This morning, we began laying out the line of the 144,000. But before we went into the detail of that, what I did was went back to the spirit of prophecy. And I created a line here that is purely based from inspiration, and thus saith the Lord. Every single waymark we get from the spirit of prophecy, obviously except this one here. 1989 is not from spirit of prophecy. We have 5 waymarks, and it follows the agricultural line. The agricultural line is found in many places. Perhaps one of the most comprehensive places is Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 to 30. We could also go to Mark 4, 26 to 28. Probably a few more verses. We could also go to Revelation 14. We're not going to pick up the chart here, but we did that the other day, if you recall. Speaks about Christ and another angel having a sickle. For Christ it says, thrust in thy sickle and reap. For the second angel it says, thrust in thy sharp sickle and gather. One of them is grain and one of them is the vine. We can also go to the book of Zechariah. We can also go to the book of Jeremiah. Zechariah 10, Jeremiah 4. They're the chapters that you could look at. Before we review this, just want to come back to this board work that we did this morning. We looked at Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2, we can see that there are 2 kingdoms brought to view. A mountain and a statue. We saw how the statue was a symbol of Satan's kingdom, and the mountain was a symbol of God's kingdom. And from this mountain, a stone is cut out. And it becomes the glorious holy mountain of Daniel 11. If a stone is cut out of this mountain, and we wanted to compare these 2 images, we can create a balance and we have a kingdom, and to balance that we would have another kingdom. So we're balancing. On this side, you have something that's cut. So on the other side, you also need something that's cut. So we can see this balancing. That's how we know that something's going to be cut out of this statue. It's in the verses itself. We can also go to other passages. Revelation 18 we had this morning. I've put another one, Daniel 11:41. Revelation 18, it's called My People. In Daniel 11, it's Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Just showing you how you do repeat and enlarge. As I say, you can show it in the chapter itself. It has all the information there. We looked at this because Ellen White says dispensationally there is to be no separation, which is in opposition to what Daniel 2 teaches. Because it clearly shows the separation. So explain that in this line here. We didn't have the date here. This is in the 300s. These are all AD dates. So in the 300s we have the history of Pergamos. So I'll just summarize. We looked at Daniel 2. We saw how Ellen White's statement appears to be contradicting Daniel 2. Went to explain that. We begin the story in the 300s. We begin with the church of Pergamos. What church number is that? Number 3. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos. I've called it worldliness. My sister called it compromise. Compromise with whom? With the world. That's why I've got worldliness. 538 to 1798. We have Thyatira. I've got punishment and captivity. Cause. Effect. Everyone understands a cause and effect relationship. This is what is the source of the problem, and it results in this. You disobey God, He punishes you. So the 1260 years of papal persecution papal, which is the history of the feet of iron and clay. This persecution or captivity is caused by what? What is causing this? It's God punishing his people. We need to be clear on that. God punishes his people because of their sins. Early writings, 74. When we looked at that passage, we developed 4 dispensations. Scattering 1, gathering 1. Scattering 2, gathering 2. So there's this alternating pattern. Scattering 1 is the 1260. Brings you to the time of the end and there's a gathering. What produces the gathering? A message. We call it an increase of knowledge. Something has changed. Hebrews. Which chapter? Chapter 7, verse 12. Remember 7, perfect promise and oath. The 12 tribes. There must of necessity be a change in the law. So there must be a change here. Otherwise, what would continue? Scattering. So there is some dispensational issue going on here. We call it, or Paul calls it, a change in the law. We could call it a rule that's changed. We can call it a message that's arrived. We can call it an increase of knowledge. We can call it one more thing. What happens at the time of the end? The unsealing. Something that is locked up. The seal gets broken. It's the unsealing of the book of Daniel. Now, if this were the book of Daniel and it was locked, you don't break that seal. You do not break the seal. And understand everything that's written. First of all, most of the book is already understood. Secondly, the unsealing is only partial. Not everything is unsealed. So Ellen White comments on this. And she tells you what's unsealed. It's a message or a prophecy from Daniel in connection with time. So it's a time message. So right here at the time of the end in 1798, there's a message of That verse is Daniel chapter 8 verse 13, which says what at the beginning? How long? Which is to do with time. So, how long? The answer is found where? Don't answer. Don't say Daniel 8 verse 14. I want the answer from somewhere else. Another book. Chapter 14 says what? The hour is come. Verse. It's all about time. Which verse is that? So it's verse 7. Verse 6 begins. Verse 7 is that statement. Verse 13. How long is the vision? The answer is to 2,300 days the sanctuary will be restored. Brings you to what date? 1844. So the answer to the question is unsealed at the time of the end. So before this, the answer to the question is what? We don't know. We don't know how long. Obviously we know it's 2,300. So we know how long. What don't we know? We don't know the start date, so we can't find the end date. Someone called out before. The start date is given in Daniel 9. So they don't know when it's going to end. Until you get to the unsealing. And now you say, what do you say? Is come. We don't want to say come. We'll say here. The time is here. When you begin to say the time is here? When you have a new rule. New laws. A gathering begins. The message in 1798 is pointing to what event? 1844. This is the message. In 46 years, the judgment's going to come. That's the message here. And when you tell people you have 46 years to get ready, what will they do? Get ready. So, to get ready, they're all going to come together. What do we call that when people come together? That's that gathering. 1844, problems arise. Why are problems coming up? What church are we? Here we are, Sardis. Revelation 3 verse 1. What does Sardis mean? Let's stop for a moment because I heard a few people say red. So because they said red, I'm going to say that's the wrong answer. Let's stop. William Miller's rules. Rule number 1. Rule number 5. What's rule number 1? One person shout out. Rule number 1. I don't think people heard. Every word is important. That's my paraphrase. What church are we in? What number? Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira. We're okay with number 5? Good. Church number 5, what rule will we look at? Rule number 5. What is rule number 5? Let the inspiration be its own expositor. Let's change that rule. Paraphrase. The Bible will be its own dictionary. So that's what the rule number 5 says. So, I want to know what Sardis is. Because if you get the answer red, which dictionary did you go to? You went to a Greek. We'll go with that one. You went to a Greek dictionary. Strong's or Thayer's? Mention those two because they're the free ones that we all have access to. So that's where my brother at the back got red from, and it's correct. But we in Church 5 will use Rule 5. We're going to make the Bible the dictionary. What does Sardis mean? Just one word. It doesn't say remnant in the Bible. So let's go to Revelation 3. And my brother said what? One word. One word. From the Bible. Give me the word that Sardis means. We're in 3 verse 1. Can we see the name? What it means? Okay, so I know thy works, that thou hast a name, that thou... What does Sardis mean? Liveth. We'll change that to alive. Someone said it means red. What is red? Why red? Because of the blood. Blood contains life. Alive. It says straight out of the Bible, it gives the definition of the word. In the verse. What's the problem? There's a book, compilation I think, it's called Faith and Spirit Prophecy book. Someone knows. Faith and works. It's 2 things. By faith, what should they have been? Alive. That's the prediction of what these people should have been, alive. Their name, their character, they should have been alive. What's their works? Dead. There's a problem. They're supposed to be alive, but they're dead. Which church do we know that is dead, but is supposed to be alive? Laodicea. So Laodicea and Sardis have the same condition. They're dead works. They're supposed to be alive. So there's a problem with this church. William Miller is part of this church. He's going to make mistakes. Make. A doing word. A work. So the work that Miller does, is it alive or dead? You have a name that says you're alive, but your works are dead. We begin to see problems with Miller's message. He gets dates wrong. He gets geography wrong. Why? Because he's dead. There are problems with that church. Which is why you have to have Philadelphia. They're going to fix everything. So there's the gathering. 1844, the movement will crash. Why does the movement crash? There's going to be a change in the law. Things are different now. If they weren't, what would continue? The gathering would continue. Now they're going to be scattered. Why are they scattered? Whose fault is that? Sardis. Because they are what? Because they are dead. They create this mess here. And now the church will be scattered. The scattering period is like this one. What do we normally call this? What kind of age? The Dark Ages. This is the Dark Ages. What's this? Is there any good thing in darkness? Yes. This is what Sister Terry's presentations are about. When was this chart created? Don't want the date. In what period of time? Not Millerite. In the scattering. Is this great light? Great light is created or produced in a scattering period. And then it begins to do a work. So there's great light in this 1260. It's created to do what? To begin to do a work. As my brother says, to begin to do a work of gathering. That's what early writing 74 is about. The chart was created in this history where all the mistakes that are on this chart get fixed. Ellen White points to 1. There are other truths on this chart. So what's about to happen? The gathering. There's great light in darkness that brings you to a point so that a gathering can begin. And what does the church do? What did the church do here? Had a name, had a work. In 1850, what's the work that we begin to do? A work that's dead. So the gathering here, does it ever happen? No. God's people are not gathered. The scattering continues. We failed in 1850. We compromised with the world. This is Pergamos, just like this. 13 years later, now God's people are going to be punished for 126 years. The experience of Thyatira. Cause and effect. Laodicea continues. It continues all the way to the time of the end. Now, this 126 years is captivity. It should be 1989. 1989, the time of the end, what will begin? A gathering. This will be number 3. Scattering number 3. These are not mentioned in inspiration. These are a consequence of the sins of God's people. Who are we in captivity to in this period? Here, who are we in captivity to? We'll call it the papacy. Here, Mystery Babylon. You go back thousands of years, it was literal Babylon. 70 years literal Babylon. 1260 years Mystery Babylon. Yeah. Here, for 126 years, who are we in captivity to? So someone said the world. Good. Apostate Protestantism. The daughter of the harlot. Or Mystery Babylon. Revelation 17 verse 5. So this is a period of darkness here. And there's going to be great light. What's the purpose of that light? To prepare you for the gathering. So the captivity should end here. And for the first group of people, it does. Isaiah 45, 46. Those two chapters. The main character is Cyrus. Ezra chapter 1. You take those chapters and combine them. Cyrus has two jobs. Number one, destroy Babylon. Number two, free the people. And when you free the people, what do? Daniel 8:14. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, be restored. Cyrus has two jobs. Number one, destroy Babylon. Number two, free people and restore the temple. How long does it take to build a temple? 1798 to 1844. Takes 46 years to build a temple. And what happens in 1798? So it's his first job. The end of Babylon. Babylon is destroyed. God's people are freed. The temple begins to get restored. Who does all that work? Cyrus. Good. So here's Cyrus in this time period. Cyrus is Medo-Persia. If we're okay with that. In this date here, what's the first work? Destroy Babylon. Who does that? In 1798. France. This is France. Who restores the people and builds the temple? Which country? United States. So this is a combination of France and the United States. France is doing its last work. America is doing its first work. We come all through this history. You come to 1989 and we have the same situation. The end of the scattering. And now, who's going to be destroyed? Apostate Protestantism is going to come down. God's people are going to be restored. And what begins? Cleansing of the sanctuary, the restoration of the temple. So this dynamic here is the one that's occurring here. There has to be a change in the law. There has to be a change in the rules. Therefore, Ellen White's statements about no new movement apply to this scattering period, not to the gathering period. If you can't see that, you're going to have Daniel fighting against Ellen White. How do you deal with that problem? You tell a lie and you say this stone is Jesus. Then you cover your lie, your mistakes by telling a lie. So if you tell a lie, it all works consistently. The truth will set you free. The truth that this is God's church on earth. And therefore, when you deal with the spirit of prophecy, you have to treat it respectfully, with care and reverence. And that means you need to know which statements are dispensational and which statements are not. The church is in a mess on this subject. This movement is in a mess in this subject. That's why it's separated. Because there are people who don't know how to use the rules correctly to work out which things are dispensational and which things are not. It's all about how you read. How readest thou? This is what we're confronted with. The people, they say, what about the Sunday law? Prove there's no Sunday law. Before you do that, you have to see that Ellen White needs to be read in a dispensational fashion. If you're not willing or able to see that, there's no point in discussing what the Sunday law looks like. So, if we start thinking about 4 generations, in our studies, where did we see 4 generations? Book. Hosea. Chapter 1. Verse 1. We saw 4 kings, 4 generations. Now, when we start looking at 4 generations, it has to have a property to it. Scalability. Fractals. You can squash it or you can expand it. So in this history here, we can have 4 generations. I'm going to suggest it's 1863, 1888, 1919, 1957. These are just waymarks in a period of time. 4 generations. And when you start thinking about 4 generations, you can do a number of things. There's a progressive sequence of events. Progression. We also can do alpha and omega. Now, 1863 is part of the Millerite history. first generation. And who's the premier prophet of the Millerite history? William Miller. That's who's going to cover most of this history. So when we start thinking about our history, our focus should be upon whom? The first generation. That's why we focus upon the Millerite history. Where would you place Ellen White? It would be here. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, why are we using a second generation prophet to explain a fourth generation experience? When we should be using a first generation prophet. So I want us to think about that, where our focus of attention should be. We know Ellen White does not come into our history. You could argue she's the first and second generation, but the bulk of her work is as a second generation person. With that in mind, it should at least alert us to the fact that we should treat her writings carefully. That she's definitely not part of our history. There's a large gap between her and us. You have to see the methodology. This is not the only methodology, this is just an introduction to why we are seeing that there is not going to be this literal Sunday law in the way that the church teaches it. The subject of dispensationalism is misunderstood by a number of people. The reason it's misunderstood because of the error and the lies that come from Future for America. I don't know what to call it except straight lies. If you've watched their presentations, you know of two men. Someone called Darby, and someone that came 100 years later whose name was Schofield. These two men, they developed a theology that's called dispensationalism. Which was really a development of the Counter-Reformation or the work of the Jesuits. A few weeks ago, at the camp meeting in Sydney, all my presentations, I don't know how many there were, 7 or 8, were all centered on this one subject of dispensationalism. Where I systematically show you the falsehood that FFA are teaching, and actually show you that they are teaching dispensationalism, not us. We understand what dispensations are. It's what I've explained here. Dispensationalism is a unique doctrine which is about literalism. The reason why this is significant, you know, hopefully you know, that President Donald Trump is identified as being Cyrus, to free the people. And if you think that's just referring to the United States, you're mistaken. Because the people he's going to free are whom? Not the Americans. It's Israel. He's already transferred the embassy to Jerusalem. Because their foreign policy is based upon what methodology? Just gave you the answer a minute ago. Dispensationalism. That's what their foreign policy is based upon. And their champion is Cyrus. Donald Trump. That's what all of these evangelical Christians are pushing him to do. Future for America have the same mindset. They don't say that they follow Donald Trump. They don't say that they believe in literal Israel. But there's only two groups, two streams of information. And they are on the opposite side of this issue. So they're the ones that are upholding literalism. Which is dispensationalism. We're going to stop there. So that was a review and expansion of what we did this morning. Tomorrow we'll go over this line that we developed this morning. Begin to expand that. Remember, when we close with prayer, there's not going to be any break. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness. We ask and pray that you would guide, direct, and bless us. Help us, Lord, as we prepare for your holy Sabbath, to begin to contemplate not only on our lives in a general sense, but the time that we have had here at this camp meeting. Also, Father, as we realize that we are in a gathering time, help us to see what this means for us individually. We ask, Lord, that you would guide, direct, and bless us and teach us your ways. In Jesus' name, amen.